Everybody. Welcome, everybody. What a difference a day makes for the weather, huh? I'm Jim Hunt. I'm the Communications Director at Sustainable CT. And this coffee hour is being recorded for those who couldn't be here and for those who are here and would like to review anything we covered today. You'll be able to find this and all of our coffee hours along with recordings of workshops and certification help and newsletter previews and a great deal more at our YouTube channel. Search YouTube for Sustainable CT, and you'll find us right there. I'll also put that link in the chat in just a moment. While you're there, be sure to check out this month's episode of the Impact a Sustainable CT podcast. New episodes are available on the 15th of each month on YouTube and at sustainablect.org and wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, say that too. For this month's show, we're introducing some of our newest Sustainable CT Fellows, Maya Aviles, Thomas Busmeyer, and Anna Hilary, who I think might be here today. Fellows are directly engaged in supporting cutting-edge sustainability initiatives, local government operations, and regional coordination, and they're swell people. They are. You will want to hear what they have to say. Coming up on July 9th at 10 a.m., we will be hosting a webinar featuring our former executive director, Lynn Stoddard, leading a discussion about Sunday. Sunday will be a nationwide tribute to the sun, solar energy, and other renewable energy, a positive, action-oriented event on the weekend of the autumnal equinox, which is September 2021. The purpose of this webinar is to celebrate and showcase solar progress in Connecticut and engage people in action for One Big Connecticut Sunday festival on September 21st, and local and regional events around the state on September 20th, along with solar initiatives leading up to and after Sunday weekend. So please do join us for that on Wednesday, July 9th at 10 a.m. I'll put a registration link in the chat for that as well. And speaking of the podcast and Sunday, our July podcast will be all about, you guessed it, Sunday, with author, educator, and environmentalist Bill McKibben as our guest, along with our own Lynn Stoddard and some other members of the Third Act. They'll talk about the organizing and planning going into Sunday and what they hope to see as a result. So be sure to look for the July episode of The Impact coming on July 15th. That's what I've got. And thanks again for being here. And that's all out of the way. We can get back to Jess. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And thanks everyone for joining us this morning. We've got the opportunity to hear from Bernicestine, McLeod, and Harold Bailey, who are the co-founders of TEAM Westport this morning. I want to just say a few months ago, I had the opportunity to hear about the work that they're doing in Westport. It's phenomenal. It's really amazing, really inspiring, and they have a lot to share with us. And we're so grateful to them for bringing their story to our network. So TEAM Westport's mission is to make the town of Westport more welcoming with respect to race, ethnicity, religion, and LGBTQIA+. They've been active for over 2 decades. And again, we're so grateful to you, Harold and Bernicestine, for coming this morning, taking time out of your busy schedule to share the work that you're doing to the rest of the Sustainable CT Network. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Harold.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I'm gonna start up here. Sharing.
Okay.
Okay. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
You can?
We're good.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect.
Great. Okay. I guess I'm going to do the steering this morning, primarily most of it.
Yes.
We both want to thank you very much for having us here. It's a real honor to be able to spend this time with you and take you through not just some of the things we're doing, but it turns out there are a network of different organizations that are doing similar things in other towns inside of Connecticut. And one of the things we want to talk about is maybe some ways in which we can find some synergy across the board with sustainable in Connecticut. Let me make sure I'm moving forward here. Oh, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so what we'd like to do this morning is just give you an intro as to our mission, then get into what we call our first principles, which are the principles by which we operate, and then take a look specifically at our model and the way that we operate. We are, as Team Westport, we operate inside the Westport government as a committee, officially sanctioned by our town council, but at the pleasure of the first select person, and we've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in the last 20 plus years that we've worked with. And then we want to get into just a discussion of some of the values, partnerships we might talk about, and some synergy that we might be able to work on coming out of this. Great. Okay. And Jessica mentioned our mission. Our mission is relatively simple. And we've added the proactively lately. It's to make Westport increasingly welcoming with respect to race, ethnicity, religion, and LGBTQIA+. That is a broad set there. The only thing we are missing that we probably would be adding if we were getting started today versus 20 years ago is women and issues around women inside of Westport. How do you handle that? And what are the principles by which you operate? Well, the way we see it in talking about making Westport more welcoming and looking at the equity issues around that, we operate by a set of operating principles that I'm going to go through very quickly here. It says that there are just as many people of color, just as many people of certain ethnicities, just as many people who are LGBTQIA, who have engineering capability, who are artists, who are comedians, who are anything that you want to say. In a large enough population, there should be just as many. And if we're talking about looking for equity, what we're looking for are really to double check that the equity is taking place. And by the way, we are very excited about the fact, and have been for years, about the fact that equity is at the top of your list of requirements for certification. But in checking for that, one of the things we look for is any disparity in actual content and the number of people that are doing these different things. And when we talk about that disparity, we don't look at people. We don't say, oh, that's a racist person or a person who is anti-Semitic. What we look for are the policies as opposed to people. And that's the whole idea. We're using anti-racist here, but it could be, if we're talking about anti-Semitism, or if we're talking about anti-Muslim or anti-LGBTQIA, same kinds of things. So in anybody's head, there are contradicting ideas that are going on at any time. So you might be thinking positively and moving in the forward direction 1 second, and 2 minutes later, something comes in your head that's going the other way. So it's always a struggle back and forth. And the idea is to try for the net to be moving us in the right direction. In this case, we're talking about racial hygiene, but it could be hygiene around LGBTQIA attitudes, etc. And so when people say, why are we doing this for those people? And how can we be good allies to those people? What we like to emphasize in Westport is that we are doing this for the benefit of every single child, family, and citizen of Westport, or anyone who's involved with Westport schools, or anybody who works in Westport, or anybody who's visiting Westport. We're doing this for everybody. So this is not a those people kind of a deal. This is a all of us deal, because it affects each and every one of us. Net, when we take a look at what's going on with respect to the equity not being there for race, religion, ethnicity, LGBTQIA, this is a little bit of a mind twist, but being anti-racist is proactively fighting against racism. But for all the other isms, It's like being anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, anti-LGBTQIA, anti-AAPI. The bottom line is, as far as we're concerned, the pattern of discrimination, or the pattern of people being left out, turns out to be all the same thing. And that's why we recently had our symbol redone about 2 years ago. And the whole idea is that the fabric of the community, and we could look at each one of those communities and sub communities and so on. If you take a look at looking at strands horizontally, and then taking those same strands and cutting across them vertically, you end up with the real fabric of the community, which talks about how we all, from each one of our communities, has a connection to the other. And many of us are in multiple communities, obviously, and have connection to each other. So what is Team Westport? How do we operate? We got started back in 2003. And the canary in the coal mine for groups like ours tends to be an incident. We had an incident at our library. I won't even get into what it is, but it could be kids leaving swastikas at schools that spark a community to do something, or it could be something that was done by the police to someone that got somebody upset about what was going on that starts it. But the whole idea was that happened, and Bernicestine ended up going to the first select woman at the time, Diane Farrell. And Diane pulled together a task force of about 16 of us. And notably, there were no white males in that group that she pulled together, but 16 of us with varying races, ethnicities, religions, and even LGBTQIA presence. And we studied with two professors from Fairfield University for several months. And they brought in a book that they had compiled of essays and historical essays, really about the history of race in the United States. And they went through the differences for African Americans, Latinx, for people who came from India, as an example, from people who came from China versus Japan. And it showed how in the United States, there's this crazy quilt of different attitudes and laws and rules about who's white and who isn't, and who gets certain capabilities and who doesn't. I mean, and so we spent half our time going through that knowledge or that history. And the other half of our time we spent getting to know each other and how each one of us was connected to this kind of work. And we came out of it really bonded. And the question was, do we do a white paper for the town that's going to go off in a corner, or do we do something else? And what we decided was, let's put together a group that tries to make awareness and diversity a fun thing. I know that sounds difficult, and that's certainly difficult in the current environment, but to try to make that fun and not be the police for diversity, but to be the ones that are proactively working with other organizations in town to ensure that at least once a year they had an event that was going to be focused on equity. So we did, and that's evolved since that time in a number of ways. But instead of our having people inside our group that would go out and try to find out what other groups are doing, we now are at the point where we have partners who sit down with us on a monthly basis to talk about what they're doing and to share with each other what's happening, so we can get synergy between different key organizations in town. Net, if we look at our Team Westport partners, everyone from the first select woman in this case to the school superintendent, the head of the Board of Education, as well as some board members, the head of the library, the head of human services, interfaith clergy, interfaith council folks who come in, the head of the Playhouse, the head of the Westport Museum, who was actually a member of Team Westport, Westport Pride, the police. All those people in general are have some representatives, if they're not there, at our meetings on a monthly basis. And you keep things going not only with those meetings, but also with key kinds of initiatives that we have going on throughout the year. Again, the focus here is a combination of lectures and discussions, as well as the MLK event, which is a major one for us every year. We have certainly strategy commitments that we all have, and then there are the set of values that we'll talk about a little bit later. And the Teen Diversity Essay Contest is a biggie for us. MLK is one where I'll get into that in a sec. And then let me move forward here. Well, I'm gonna now switch back to, not only do we talk about what those positions are, but these are the people that are in those positions right now. One of the differences is our chief of police has just changed, and Dave Farrell is the new chief of police. But Dave had worked with us on a number of initiatives in the past, so we have a strong relationship there, continued with Westport Police. But these are the actual people that are filling those roles right now that I talked about in the prior slide. I do want to say one thing about the police. From the beginning, we've had some representation initially with the police department, and that really got to be very strong when Fodi Koskinas came in about 8 years ago. Not only do we have reports in from the police, and actually with fire and EMT as well, as to what they're doing around diversity, but they have worked with us and the town to create a civilian review board. And it's actually at the behest of the chief, who wanted to have a group that looks at the complaints that come through from the public. The whole idea here, again, was to stay ahead of something that might happen, and to have a relationship with the police in such a way that we really do check what's going on. And so when the town put together the legislation for the civilian review panel, they made Team Westport, or a representative from Team Westport, kind of an ex officio member of that civilian review board. So these kind of partnerships have really yielded some pluses. The other one is in terms of the Board of Education. We worked with the board, and back in 2005, we were named by the board as their advisor as an organization around diversity in schools. And so a number of our initiatives have been focused that way. We had an equity study that was done several years ago. That's now yielded No Place for Hate, which I'll talk about very briefly in a sec. We talked about conversations, lectures, discussions, and so on. This just gives you a flavor of some of the things we've talked about. Conversation is Westport ready for a Black president. Obviously, that's back in the 2000s. When Charleston hit, we had a vigil that brought together people from various towns into Westport to have that take place. One of the things we've had for our MLKs are very interesting national figures, like the author for Me and White Supremacy, but that led to discussion groups where people were actually going through the recommendations inside that book to learn about themselves and their own attitudes about white supremacy. And we've had Rhianna Gunn-Wright, who came in from Chicago. She is many of you may know, she's one of the co-authors of the Green New Deal, who spoke here. And we did that in partnership, by the way, with what was Sustainable Westport. I think you might, at that point, it might have still been inside the Westport government. I think now it's kind of a 501c3 or something like that outside the Westport government. The other things are, like Shonda Rhimes has done several events for us, including our most recent MLK. We have AAPI month, Pride month, and so on. We've had a who's who of outstanding speakers, National Book Award winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, and so on, to come in for our MLK events. Our Teen Diversity Essay Contest is one that's been very important. That's where, for the last 13 years, we have put together a prompt, and we've said in 1,000 words or less, we want you to write an essay that tells us about stereotypes or a microaggression this year, or taking a knee at one point, or white privilege, or Black Lives Matter. The most recent one was identity. And the winner gets $1,000, second place $750, third place gets $500. And every now and then we do an honorable mention for $250. We had, but it gets attention in town because it gives the town a chance to hear from the kids at who are in high school. And by the way, it's 9th through 12th graders of kids who either go to school in Westport or are from Westport going to school outside of the town. It gives them a chance to understand what's going on in the heads of those kids and what they're seeing in their culture inside of our schools. Been very important. At one point we had about 200 alumni from Staples High School who got together one summer and really got into this and wrote back letters to the superintendent saying, here's what we ran into during this. And here's one of the things they pointed out was they were so unprepared to go out into the rest of the world because they'd had so little exposure from an equity point of view to environments that were not like Westport, which are, 95% white. Okay, and then there's the issue of other things. I mentioned that we had an equity study in schools. In schools, we have No Place for Hate that's now taken place. That's an ADL program inside our schools where there's a pledge by kids, a voluntary pledge. And that was all done this year in all 8 of our buildings, all 8 of our schools, and they were certified in May of this year, which was a big deal for us. That's kind of the outcome of the equity study and all the other work that's been going on with the school system. And from a values point of view, I want to get into the fact that we have town values and an RTM statement around DEI in our town. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. This is just the glitz of who was at the MLK and the Black Barbie event. That Netflix, Netflix video that Shonda Rhimes did actually premiered in Westport the day before it was on Netflix. King in the Wilderness is an excellent movie about the last days of Martin Luther King's life, which was produced by and written in part by one of the Westport residents who in partnership with a Playhouse showed that film and talked about it over our MLK weekend. These are the pledges out of No Place for Hate for elementary on one side and then middle and high school kids on the other side. It's that kind of voluntary thing that takes place. The kids actually run initiatives around identity, bullying, and bias. 3 different initiatives for a year. They put their own committees together in each one of the schools. There is some supervision from teachers, but in general, it's something they're volunteering to do and they get excited about. We've had really good results there. From a discussion point of view now, what I like to do is you get into talking about value statement. And when I talk about values, again, it's really exciting to us that in the work that we've done with Sustainable Westport, equity has always been a key piece. We remember your values wheel, not your values, but your wheel that you have with all the different elements that are required in order to get sustainable certification. And I know at one point in the early days, equity was not one of the slices, and then it did become one of the slices. And we really applauded that and actually had some of our members go through your training because we wanted to have partnership at the time. So in terms of value statements, we wanted you to know this is just a sampling of some of the other places besides Westport that we work with. Chin is here on the call. He's from we work with Fairfield County's Community Foundation. And he's called together a number of us so that we share information with each other. And so here's Team Westport. The yellow is where did the values for that organization come from? Where's the grounding? And the whole point is, certainly with all the disinformation that's going on around DEI and belonging and welcoming right now, the key is to have a value, not just a value statement, but a set of values that are grounded in something that helps get rid of the chaff that's thrown out there about being woke and all this other crazy stuff. So for us, it's our town value statement as well as one by our town council, the RTM, which talks about racism as a health threat to the community. But in Darien, there are two organizations. One is a 501c3 that's focused around equity. That's Coffee. And the other one is CSDP, which is a group that's put together inside of the parent part of the school system. And so it's grounded in the values of the Darien school system. In New Canaan, 501c3, same thing. And in Easton and Reading, it's focused around the values of the League of Women Voters. The whole point is that whatever your geography is, there's probably somebody that's doing this kind of work. And what we're trying to do is to start to pull together the network of people, or create a network of people who are doing it, so we all know who we are and we can start to share what's going on. I wanted to show you what we did around values very quickly in Westport. And this is a poster that was put together that we have up down on at our library on the river. When you're walking out on the river walk there, you can see this is kind of a net of the value statement. But this, and by the way, if you type in Westport, Town of Westport, DEI, it'll take you right to this and a lot more. But I just wanted you to know we spent the really exciting thing about the value statement for the town is, number one, the only group that can actually create legislation for the town is our board of select people. And in October of 2023, that took place with this statement in detail. So it's neat to have a nice poster that says some things, but this got to be very specific. Dismantling systemic equities and othering, ensuring the full humanity of any group or individual is never politicized or considered debatable. That was a biggie. Applying an equity perspective to all decisions, training in equity and inclusion for all elected officials, expanding our local narrative historically to be increasingly accurate and inclusive. And by the way, we helped sponsor some work done by what is now the Westport Museum of Culture and History, which got into the history of Black people in Westport. And I know when we first started talking about doing that, it was like, is there a history? Well, it turns out there's a very rich one that actually goes all the way back to when people were enslaved in Westport. And they're buried at the church, at one of the old church cemeteries that goes back to the 1700s. Because people were considered property. Who they are is logged in terms of who was, what I would say, who kidnapped them, and who to whom they were enslaved. And so there's this long record at the church about who's there and who they were and who they belonged to and so on. That was done, and we ended up with an award-winning exhibit that's gotten some national attention out of that. But that's just one of the other things. Team Westport was mentioned. I'm just throwing this out to say we went to our partners to get these caveats inside of our equity and inclusivity statement, which we could do because we had been working together for a number of years. So it's like, how much are you willing to put in that you can commit over the long term for your organization, for the town of Westport? I just mentioned that as something that might be interesting if you're looking at strengthening your equity requirements or anything like that. This is We'd love to work with you on it. And by the way, I made the mistake of putting down there 2025. That should have been 2023. That's my typo. The other is equity group partnerships. Groups like we mentioned New Canaan, Darien, and Easton. There's Fairfield's got a study that was done, but the group hasn't really gotten off the ground. We've worked with Southbury. Trumbull's got some things going on. Again, if there is a case where you can work with someone there in your geography, those kind of partnerships could yield a great deal. And we're looking at, is there programming synergy? Where does it happen? Where's it? An obvious place to look is if there's something that's going on with schools where we could program some things and talk about an equitable approach, which is your approach to what's going on. And then finally, we see in Fairfield County, our county here, there are 20 registered organizations, 20 registered towns, 1 gold, 3 silver, and 6 bronze. But that means there are 10 that are not certified. And one of them is Westport. And something that happened here that I think you also ought to be aware of is there's this whole push-pull where when we got a change that went away from some proactivity here, some of the organizations that were doing these kind of things like ours were encouraged to go outside of government and set up a 501c3 and hey, everything will be fine and you don't have to worry about getting FOIA'd, because at one point we were getting FOIA'd like crazy by people who opposed what we were doing. We fought that and said, we're going to stay inside the government. And it makes a huge difference. And I know Sustainable West, I don't know exactly what's going on there now, but they were cooking several years ago while they were inside the government. And we had the first selectman at that point who was really pushing us towards getting gold certification. I think we got up to silver. It's one thing to keep in mind also that a lot of this is so tied to the politics that's going on. There's a chance we can help each other and keep each other on the right path here. So that's it. I'm gonna throw it up for discussion, Q&A, anything else.
Harold, thank you so much. That's amazing. Folks, who's got questions? You can feel free to use the chat if you're more comfortable, or if you want to raise a hand and come off mute and vocalize the question, that's fine too.
Oh, a lot of chat, a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Well, I'll kick us off. I've got a question on the DEI strategy commitments. I'm wondering, do you track progress towards them? And if so, how?
That's a great question. There is no formal tracking about that. And where that shows up. And by the way, when that was done, we were talking about reaching certain, that turns out to be primarily the public safety departments and the town of Westport. And while we haven't, periodically we had the head of human services, or human resources, as opposed to human services. We have the head of human resources come in and tell us how they're doing publicly. We also have with the police department, we are an integral part of the interviewing that goes on. So we are interviewing candidates and we're looking at which ones are accepted and not accepted. We do the same thing with the fire department. They've done a lot less hiring. So we get it that way by our representatives who are involved with a hiring process. So that's been about it. But there hasn't been like a KPI where we're checking the KPI to see how you're doing against each one of these things. It's been less formal than that.
Okay, that's helpful to hear. We've got a question from Anna, whose mic isn't working, but she typed it in. What has been the largest challenge in establishing Team Westport, especially within the political climate today?
The global climate today. I mean, we have another presentation which is called The Siege. Um, we, I mean, things really took off for us after 2016, uh, with the election, the national election at that point. A lot of people wanted to come in and wanted to understand what can we do, how can we, who are we, what do we stand for, and so on. We were cooking with speakers and conversations and all kinds of things then. And then it was summer of 2021. This happened not only in Westport, but it happened in cities all over Fairfield County, and as I understand it, probably all over the country. All of a sudden, there was this kind of what I would call right wing, but a siege around people who came in and said things like talking about race is racist. Um, uh, DEI, what it would be the equivalent of DEI is a bad thing. And we shouldn't be talking about it. We shouldn't be putting any resource into it. It's indoctrination. And talking about it at schools and teaching about the history is an indoctrination, those kind of things. We got FOIA'd like crazy, for communication. So we've kind of fought our way through that with the help of our town attorneys in light of the political situation and the fact that we had also our first select person was Republican and had to deal with the politics because she had a number of people in her camp who felt that we shouldn't be doing this, but she stuck with it and she helped us. We all worked together to get through this, but that whole attitude has been a real problem. That's why we keep going back to the values statement and we say, well, is the town ready to change that legislation? And the attitude has been not just no, but hell no. We're not going to do that. And that's that. So even though they've added some people to our group who are not in favor of what we're doing, like 3 out of 13. So they have a voice. We've been able to work through it. And that's why I lean on the values more than anything else. If you got that, it really helps.
Abby, I see you've got a hand up. You want to come off mute?
Yeah, thanks. Morning, everybody. I have a comment more than a question, which is that I had the opportunity to go to the Juneteenth tour on the history of Black and African American folks in Westport last week, and it was. I mean, I do anti-racism, anti-oppression work for a living, and thought I do know quite a bit, and I was blown away by how much I had never heard of, but how much I never knew. Um, Stories that are incredibly inspiring, stories that are absolutely horrifying, um, and just really also thought-provoking around how many things haven't changed, right? The names from some things have changed, but we used to be able to just like actively segregate under the law. We still do it. We just call it something differently. I'm super salty about the governor vetoing the housing bill, so that's what's coming through there. But anyway, if anybody gets the opportunity to visit the Westport History Museum or to work with the executive director, Raman, they're open for like individual, private tours or going to have meetings there. I'm going to try to do it for some of my work. Could not be a more engaging, able to provide information, like I said, that's pretty intense in just such an engaging, thoughtful, inspiring way. So I just wanted to really put a plug out for that. I know Harold and Bernicestine and Team Westport do absolutely incredible work. This was a new resource to me, so I just really wanted to give it an extra plug.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We'll pass it on to Ramin.
yeah.
And by the way, she would be very excited if you wanted, if you've got schools that want to come in and get that tour, they can do it for school kids. There's also a virtual capability, so she can do it without your being here physically.
Very cool. So John, you've got a hand up.
Yes, Harold, thanks very much for this comprehensive overview. Here's my question, and that is, um, globally, the people who have done the least to create greenhouse gas pollution pay the highest price, in terms of health impacts. And it does your program track the energy conservation renewable programs that are getting to the heart of these inequities and who has access to, energy audits, solar programs, et cetera? Because I know I'm from Woodbridge, and people say, oh, Woodbridge is a wealthy suburb of New Haven. That it is, but right next to our town is the Naugatuck Valley, and three of the poorest cities are in the Naugatuck Valley. So I'm just wondering, do you all in Westport track the ways in which you're helping economically disenfranchised people get out of the hole of energy costs?
Well, in terms of tracking that kind of thing, I think we were doing that more by leaning on Sustainable Westport when it was active. So we had members of Sustainable Westport who would attend and tell us about things that were going on. When we brought in Rihanna Gunright, that I mean, she had some great suggestions about things we could do with Bridgeport. Coming out of her lecture, the problem was our person who was excited about it was one of the ministers here who ended up leaving, and Sustainable Westport. I don't know what's going on there. I'll just put it that way. So and so since that happened, I don't think we haven't had really any way of getting the access to it or having the focus on it. So I guess the answer right now is not much. I'd love to see that change.
Yeah, then we can then.
Right.
Yeah, we can try to get it going again, just to see.
And Jessica, I guess we'd have to work with you to find out what's going on.
Yeah, we can connect offline and see if we
Yeah.
can,
Yeah.
we have some contacts there. We can reach out.
Yeah.
Dorothy, I see you got a hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, and I apologize if you mentioned this earlier and I missed it. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about how your organization or group started. I know that it originated with the town, and then I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for other towns that might be interested in getting started with this work. As we know, Connecticut is a highly segregated state, so a lot of towns are predominantly white. So I'm interested to know if you have any advice for especially predominantly white communities that might be interested in engaging in this sort of work.
Sure, there's I don't know. Let me just say as I mentioned, there's a little network of us that are already sharing information. So Jen is on still, I think, from Fairfield County's Community Foundation. If you can get to him or you can get to us, one of the things for anyone who's thinking about this is we could talk to you about your environment. And one of the first things is going to be with whom are you going to partner? Can you get support from the town? If you can get support from inside the town where you can become a committee, that's a big deal. You could start as a task force to take a look at what's going on and then say you'd like to then look at some of the other organizations like this in the state, get some of their input and come back with a recommendation. That's actually the way we got going as a task force. And then we decided instead of writing a paper to move on and actually put an organization together. I know at Fairfield, it appears they did a white paper, but I don't know that their organization has gotten off the ground right now, but I know they're trying to get going there. And once you get it, it's important for the town to have a focus on values, as I mentioned before. So the town is going to have to adopt something that says this organization is important and we want that to be a focus for us around belonging and welcoming and so on. that's one. The other sweet spot is always the schools and children. And that was our focus, one of our key focuses from the beginning, because no one wants, not no one, most people don't want their kids to grow up to be bigots or to be ignorant of the rest of the world. And at this point, the majority of the kids in this country who are 15 years and younger are non-white, as an example. And that gap, that's growing to be more and more in that way. And as somebody mentioned, those kids are not going to become not non-white by the time they're 18 and they're voting. And that gap is going to, that's a lot of that's going to continue. So it's very important to understand all the different cultures and the different people in the country. If you're preparing your kids for the real world when they go out, and this, you mentioned, whether it's Woodbridge or it's Westport or any of these wealthy suburbs, and I guess all the groups we're working with have been focused on the suburbs versus the urban areas. There is a difference in the approach. And so one of the things is in this network, we're kind of building some knowledge about how to attack a 95% white community and get it to take some ownership and sign up to do this. So anyway, let us know if you want to work
Great.
on.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Sure.
Jan, I know you're online and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you have your video on now. So maybe, do you want to share a few words about the group that Harold's mentioning?
Yeah, not a problem. Hello, everyone. I'm Junior Nodum, at the director at the Fairfield County Community Foundation, and we had made it in our commitment to equity. We basically took it upon ourselves to provide a convening space for DEI work. And it was originally on two levels, which was municipal, and then also looking for town leaders who were leading DEI work in the county. The municipal, unfortunately, became defunct as following the affirmative action case. A lot of the positions just ceased to exist. There weren't many in the county in the first place. However, in almost opposition to that, we were able to identify quite a small number of town leaders, including TEAM Westport, who were already doing the work in their towns and who were just looking for a space to be able to identify where there are similarities in terms of issues that are facing their towns, what are best practices, what are challenges that are similar, and working and learning together. And since we've been meeting, where are we now? It's been a year and a half.
Yeah.
Right. It's been a lot of progress, and the group is definitely in a space in which they are thinking very proactively, and where there's going to be spaces for collaborative action in which we are addressing similar issues in a similar way. So that, and essentially that you start making this kind of like united front of the way DEI is going to be approached in the towns, in the county, and then from there we can start building up a county identity around this.
That will be the webinar part 2, the county identity piece. That's great. Any other questions from the group? Feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat. This is your moment. You've got a burning question. All right, I want to just say a huge thank you to Harold and Bernicestine for sharing the work that's happening in Westport, for doing the work for decades. It's really inspiring to see. I've learned a lot. I hope folks on the line have learned a lot. And this will be recorded, so there's a lot of information. So we'll send it out in a couple days. You can rewatch, share with your networks if you know anyone who's interested in doing this type of work in their own community as well. But Harold, Bernicestine, thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing and taking the time. And everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.